Hey there, literature enthusiasts and dear friends of the Cinema Vault. It's such a joy to have you here, nestled in this cozy corner of thoughtful, intellectual film conversation. I hope you're all doing wonderfully, maybe sipping on something comforting, with a notebook open and your curiosity fully awake. If you enjoy diving into stories with me, peeling back layers, exploring thematic undercurrents, and musing on the resonance between film and life, please do take a moment to like and subscribe. It means so much. But no rush, no pressure, just know you're welcome. And I'm genuinely grateful to share these spaces with kindred spirits who cherish deeper conversation. Now, before we set off, I want to make something very clear. This is not a typical movie review. This is a deeply intellectual, theoretical, and critical exploration meant for those with a literature background, or simply those who long for insight, resonance, and education to the medium of film. Think of it as a guided walk through a forest of ideas, with the film as our path, and our conversation as a trail of breadcrumbs we leave behind. So sit back, breathe, and let's ease into our journey together. I'm excited to see where it takes us. I remember the very first time I encountered this story. It was a fleeting moment, really, a brief spark of recognition that seemed to whisper, "There's something more here." I'd wandered into a theater on a day heavy with expectation. The kind when you're craving something lighthearted, yet you hope it resonates beyond the surface. And there it was, electric, kinetic, brimming with possibility, yet carrying undercurrents of mythic structure and archetypal struggle. I left the theater not just entertained, but intrigued, feeling as though I'd brushed up against something quietly profound, something that called to a poetic part of me. So let me walk you through what this film is, from my vantage point, through a lens shaped by story, by metaphor, by literary form. At its core, it's a vibrant, fast-paced cinematic experience. Part odyssey, part fable, with our titular blue protagonist at its center, alive with energy and brimming with both comic lightness and mythic weight. The world he inhabits is one part gleaming futurism, one part hidden sorcery, and entirely pulsing with narrative tension. In literary terms, it feels very much like a modern myth, retooled for the digital age, complete with elemental forces, a hero's journey, and an ecosystem that shifts between warmth and peril. The opening scenes really set the tone. They drop us into a whirlwind immediately, and we're pulled along at dizzying speed. But even in that rush, there's rhythm, beats of humor, moments of silence, and flashes of visual poetry if you watch carefully. The narrative is structured to feel episodic yet coherent, like chapters in a fast-moving novel, each building upon the last, each deepening our understanding of this world's hidden layers. Now, as for the plot, allow me to sketch it in brief strokes, not to spoil, but to spark your imagination. Our agile hero is propelled into adventures that unfold across realms, some familiar, others wondrously new. There are chases and battles, yes, but also a moment of introspection, where he pauses, however briefly, to reflect on his place in all this, to sense the weight of destiny, or perhaps the pull of simple companionship. We're introduced to allies and rivals, each encoded with symbolic import. A figure of raw power burdened by ambition, a guardian whose faith in our hero is both anchor and impetus, a shadow whose motivations remain delightfully ambiguous. As the story unfolds, we hit key turning points where loyalty, identity, and free will collide, and the stakes expand from the personal to the cosmic. One pivotal twist, oh, you'll feel it, comes when layers of the antagonist's motives are peeled back. We realize this is not a villain out of malice alone, but out of fear, perhaps even regret. Suddenly, what seemed like unalloyed conflict gains texture. The protagonist's struggle becomes not just about victory, but about understanding, redemption, and maybe reconciliation. There's another twist later on that reframes our understanding of the world's magic. Suddenly those gleaming rings, those shimmering portals, are not mere set dressings, but symbols of connection, of cycles, of choices made and choices yet to come. For me personally, this film resonates on a few levels that feel, candidly, almost ineffable. I grew up with stories that taught me about speed, not just a thrill, but the necessity of pause. You see, in my own life, there were seasons where I rushing through coursework, projects, relationships. I thought momentum equal meaning. Yet this story reminded me that true movement, real purpose, is not only about velocity, but about direction, intention, and awareness. Watching our blue hero dart through worlds, I felt a mirror held up. The exhilaration of moving fast, balanced against a silent longing to slow down, to breathe, to root oneself in something meaningful. That tension resonates deeply with me. And there's more. There's a sort of poetic justice in seeing a hero defined by his speed, grappling with being seen, not just as a blur, but as a being capable of connection, of feeling, of depth. And that, friends, echoes something I've carried in my own life. The realization that even when we feel too much or move too fast for comfort, we deserve to be understood. The film, in its playful, kinetic way, gave me that quiet affirmation. I also can't help but appreciate how the environments, though lavishly rendered, have emotional texture. I notice a brush of wind in a forest that seems to hum, the glint of light across metallic surfaces that feel almost mournful, as if they remember something before all the blinking lights and roaring motors. It's a visual and literary language of faint echoes, of the old world quietly echoing beneath the new. I suspect that for those of us who came of age reading pastoral poetry, or those who turned dog-eared pages about memory and loss, these small visual moments speak volumes. So as we move deeper in our conversation, beyond this opening narrative, I want to invite you to watch for those resonances too. I'll guide us through thematic thicket. The interplay of motion and stillness, the questions of identity and choice, the role of allegiance and reconciliation, and the symbolism woven into the visual tapestry. We'll talk about character arcs that surprise us, narrative rhythms that hum beneath the dialogue, and the spaces where silence speaks louder than sound effects. But before we do, let me thank you again for caring about storytelling as much as I do. Cinema can be flashy, it can be loud, it can be pure spectacle, and that's wonderful. But there's something irreplaceable about that rare moment when a blockbuster dazzles and invites reflection, where the laugh leaves a shiver, where the chase leaves a stillness. My aim here is to walk alongside that shiver and stillness with you. Our path through this film may wind to the symbolic, the allegorical, the emotional. I might bring in references from classic literature to philosophy, even to childhood recollections that now ripple into adulthood. And that's exactly what I hope this space becomes. A tapestry of ideas anchored by our shared love for story, our pursuit of meaning, and our willingness to feel deeply. I'm honored to have your company, and I'm excited to see where the road leads next. All right, friends, and I mean friends, are you ready? Let's step further into our cinematic myth and begin to unravel its many threads, confident that even in the midst of high-speed adventure, there's room for thought, for wonder, and for the gentle understanding of our own human journeys. You know that delightful flutter in your chest when you step into a story that never stops guiding you forward, even when you're desperate to pause and catch your breath. That's exactly the feeling this part of our cinematic myth gave me. It's a breathless dance, a rush of color and sound, punctuated by quieter pulses of connection and discovery, like catching glimpses of the heart within a hurricane. We open in a place that radiates energy. Skies streaked with electric blue, metals that glint like captured starlight, a pulse already running under the air. Our hero emerges, not with fanfare or announcement, but in motion, curled tight, then extending into motion, darting through corridors that seem to defy gravity. There's no hesitation, just a pure, joyful act of running, of being defined by speed. It's kinetic poetry, and in those first moments I felt something stir deep inside me. Like I recognize, in that blur of blue, a memory of ambition that obeys no brakes, no restraints. But this isn't a solitary sprint. Almost immediately, something pulls from beyond the edges of the frame, a disturbance, a tremor in the world that shifts attention. Our hero is intercepted by a sudden shift, a shimmering portal opening, a boundary breached. It's beautiful and strange, like witnessing the moment a myth reemerges into the modern world. And when he blurs through, we find ourselves in a realm that pulses differently, soft with green light, threaded with whispering wind, and attuned to something more ancient than any skyscraper's gleam. There's a moment of stillness there. It's brief, but it's there. And in that pause, I swear I felt his curiosity match mine. He pauses at a glade, surrounded by mist that rolls like breath. And for a heartbeat, speed yields to wonder. It's telling, isn't it? That even an entity defined by velocity can be stopped by beauty, by mystery. From there, the plot sweeps forward, swift and rhythmic. Our hero's curiosity leads him deeper into that realm's core, where he encounters guardians. Figures rooted in silence, shaped by stone and shaded by purpose. They stand watch over an artifact, a relic of great luminescence, one that resonates with a power both ancient and newly awakened. Our hero's presence stirs something. A glow blooms across the relic's surface. He reaches out, trembling, and you can almost feel his heartbeat in that luminous hum. Soon enough, intrusion follows. A figure emerges from the shadows, powerful, determined, and cloaked in ambition. Their arrival is less dramatic, no thunderclap, no decoration. Rather, a quiet step onto sacred ground, an assertion that what's hidden must be claimed. The tension ripples. Our hero watches, wary. The watchers shift. And suddenly, alliances shift too, though no word is spoken. The artifact pulses again, this time in response not only to curiosity but to conflict. Light fractures, streams into tendrils, touching our hero and the ambition-racked stranger alike. There's a momentary binding, a tether of shared luminescence, as if the world breathes in, holding its breath. The guardian stone figures groan, ancient cogs turning in response to that shared spark. The ground hums. And then, the stranger retreats, dragging a tendril of darkness with them. Our hero is left standing in that half-made peace, luminous energy coursing through him, stirring connection to the realm without fully anchoring him. When he exits, that swirling portal closes behind him. There's a sense of displacement. He's back in gleaming cityscapes, but his eyes carry a new weight. That glow didn't leave him entirely. In his hand, a fragment of light, pulsing faintly, as if reminding that there's more to the world than highways and neon. And that shift sets in motion everything that follows. Next, we cut to his home base, someplace that looks functional, nearly sterile, but for the small things that Market has lived in. A loan book on a shelf, a half-scuffed sneaker, a faded photo pinned above a workbench. It's comfortable, yes, but tame compared to that other realm. He moves through rituals, charging station, power-up, gear check, with a softness in his eyes. The fragment of light rests next to him on the workbench, inexplicable, insistent. He glances at it again and again. Then the inciting confrontation arises. Allies from his past, figures of loyalty, friendship, and sometimes exasperation, arrive in crisis. A crisis born of energy fluctuations across their world, disruptions that ripple outward from where that portal opened. Buildings appear to flicker, time flows unevenly in places, and whispers speak of a pulse that shouldn't be. They gather around him urgently, hoping his speed, his instinct, his inexplicable connection to that broken threshold might hold an answer. A plan forms. He'll be escorted, to test, to journey, to heal. They outfit a craft, adapted to both the technological and the mystical, an amalgam that cries out its own mythology. He glances at the fragment of light, now stowed with care. He sinks into the pilot's seat, senses humming, resolve tightening, and then arrives at first real dialogue with companion, the heart center, if you will, a friend who speaks with measured earnestness. Their conversation flickers between banter and gravity. She mentions how things have grown darker, more frantic. He replies with a half-smile, "Oh, we'll be fine," but his glance drops to the pulsing shard. I remember feeling for that moment, recognizing the bravado balanced on fragile hope. That tension, it made my chest ache, like memory. They take off, slicing through skies that turn strange. The storm of anomalies lies ahead. Rivers that run backwards, skies that pulse with alien color, buildings that erupt in fragile crystalline fault lines. The craft weaves through fractures in reality, using speed to outrun chaos, wit to evade instability. There's a vertiginous montage, slick, wrenching, beautiful. I could barely focus on my breathing. I was so drawn in. Then they land or crash, depending on perspective, on the edge of a fractured forest, where reality seems like mist and memory overlapping. They step out, and I swear the world is breathing, each leaf and stone alive with trembling potential. The fragment of light pulses again, growing stronger. The companion notes it in hushed surprise, an echo of the first realm, an extension of what they sought to repair. In that forest, they discover ruins, pillars carved with symbols older than language, glyphs that speak of cycles, of guardians, of harmony broken. The air is thick with memory, and the light fragment hums like recognition. As they delve deeper, they uncover writing, etched into stone. Words and archaic tongues meet translation devices and intuition, and the message trickles through. He bears the spark of worlds. That spark, that fragment, is not an accident. It's a key. Or perhaps it is the opening of a question that could not be unasked. But the forest does not yield openly. A tremor ripples beneath their feet, and they break into flight as the ground fractures, revealing glinting veins of energy, dark and light, intertwined. The light fragment and the fissures almost sing in resonance, and I could feel the hairs on my skin. That uncanny sense that myth is not myth when you stand at its edge. They escape that tremor, but the ruin tongues its threat. Vines of energy chase them. Shadows shift. They hurtle out onto open land. Yet every breath is heavier with significance. More weight present behind each choice. At night, under unfamiliar constellations, the companion finally speaks what's on both their hearts. The light fragment is dangerous, yes, but perhaps it can heal, or perhaps it will rend. He looks at it, holding it out in the glow of lantern and star, and says softly that he didn't choose the spark, but maybe he must choose what to do with it. And at that moment, I felt a deep smile. I recognized that moment in my own life, the moment between fear and resolve, where you hold something too large to bear, and yet you promise silently that you'll try. They sleep that night under shifting skies, anchored by camaraderie, by shared purpose. I could almost smell the pine, hear nocturnal breathing of forest, feel the quiet within the storm. Dawn breaks with a jolt. Explosions of light, attacks from shapes that slither between solid and vapor, guardians corrupted by strange energy. Our duo leaps into motion again. Their reactions, fluid, practiced, human, feel born of deep friendship and shared history. He runs. She navigates projections of trap and hazard. In one swift beat, they cross a chasm. In the next, she's injured, crumpled, and he freezes. Speed falters in the face of care. He cradles her, vulnerability laid bare under battered skies. And in that fragile pause, the fragment pulses stronger, a glow not of action, but of clarity. It bathes him in memory, of laughter, of childhood turns of phrase, of being seen. The surge of light heals, not like a salve, but like a truth. Her breath steadies. They share a stare, wordless, whole, under the silent chant of shifting skies. The forest shifts again, opening, closing, the way dreams do, and they step through into a place more ordered, sacred, a chamber carved of living rock, trailing with vines woven through glyphs, ringing with resonance. Here stands the artifact again, broken now, its pieces scattered across hallways. The light fragment in his grasp begins to pulse in recognition. The walls hum in response. Ancient song of opening, of seeing. I felt it so strongly. My hand itched as if I held a fragment too. He approaches, placing the shard among the broken pieces. The room rumbles. Light arcs along veins and stone, converging on him and the piece. A shape emerges in the air, not fully formed, not fully gone. The artifact sings in vibration, not in words. It says, "You are part of the world." And in that resonance, I swear I felt the boundary between me and the screen thin. This wasn't just a movie moment. It was a tether to something larger. Then suddenly, the scene fractures again, a tremor, a shift. The companion calls his name. They grasp hands. The artifact hums now with their joint heartbeat. Light floods outward, streaming through cracks, weaving across glyphs, healing fractures in walls. The world seems to remember itself. And as they stand in that glow, their breaths aligned, I realize this isn't just recovery. It's recognition, of connection, of purpose, of being chosen and choosing. And then we cut, just then, to rising tension elsewhere. Figures in distant towers observe. Shadowed meetings convene. They whisper of the spark and of the bearer. Plans are made. Power is hungering. Wings of ambition beat beyond the threshold. I felt the hairs at the back of my neck prickling, because the world they've awakened now has noticed them, and not all who watch are friends. It's a moment when triumph and peril dance luxuriously together. And I realize the story is not drawing breath. It's capturing it, holding it for the next surge. And so here we are, between that healing glow and the shadow that looms, a space full of promise and weight, camaraderie and caution, myth and modernity, and the curious question of what we choose when we hold something too powerful to ignore. There's a curious hush that settles over a story just before the sky breaks open. And here, in this unfolding mythic melody, that hush trembles with promise and peril. We rejoin our companions, still reeling, still connected by hope, yet haunted by the fractures they've awakened. It begins with the eclipse cannon rising, a silent giant framed by trembling light. It isn't just machinery. It's a monument to grief and retribution, built by a mind ravaged by loss, guided by resentment. The air between Sonic and his friends crackles with alarm. Tails glances at Knuckles, whose silent grit radiates tension. Each of them understands, without words, that the stakes have folded inward toward the personal even as they scale cosmic heights. Across that tense horizon stands the architect of this reckoning, Gerald, haunted and unhinged, eyes flickering with remembrance of Maria. There's a tremor in his voice when he speaks of humanity, not as wrong, but as irredeemable. He bends reason with sorrow and rage, crafting destruction as tribute, believing only extinction can honor what was lost. Then there is Evo, caught between ambition and something softer. If not redemption, then at least uncertainty. He casts one glance toward Gerald's fury and another toward Sonic's battered goodwill. And perhaps for the first time, Sonic sees in that glance the faint shape of conflict, not villain, but someone divided by the weight of legacy. And Shadow, he watches, clenched between memory and motion, every beat of his heart reverberating with loss. In the pulse of the cannon, he hears echoes of Maria's song, the lullaby of a simpler trust, the tremble of what was beloved and gone. In that charged stillness, Sonic's speed unsettles into purpose. Our blue hero moves swiftly, a blur of cobalt calm, as Tails and Knuckles navigate chaos and collapse. They race through corridors of melting earth and displaced steel, the crackle of failure humming beneath their feet. I almost felt my own skin prickle with the sensation of their urgency. Then comes the inevitable collision. Sonic meets Shadow in a crescendo of motion, friction not just of bodies, but of grief and resolve. When they clash, it isn't just power. It's the echo of two hearts broken by loss, mirrored in each other's sadness. Rings and emeralds swirl, lightning arcs, and suddenly they both ascend, not just physically, but mythically. Superpowered, luminous, bodies charged with possibility and regret. In that domain of brilliance, the battle blooms. Every strike reverberates with memory, villainy tangled up with sorrow, strength tinged by regret. But in the arc of their blows, something softens. Sonic, channeling all he has known about pain and connection, speaks, not with words at first, but with the resonance of experience. He senses he's reaching Shadow, and then he chooses mercy. I remember nearly holding my breath when Sonic called off the blow, that moment of reckoning when he could have ended it, but instead offered understanding. It bridged the abyss. Shadow falters. The storm in his heart still rages, yet a fissure opens, drawn by the echo of Maria's voice, by Sonic's words of forgiveness, by the recognition that love persists even amid ruin. He steps back, joining Sonic in purpose. Together, they shift from enemies to allies, united by grief, guided by mercy. And all at once, their alliance hums against the hum of the cannon's core. Tails and Knuckles, our silent lamplighters, slip through corridors of threat to reach the core controls. Fingers tense, hearts pounding, maps and codes loaded in seconds. Outside, the cannon's beam ignites like a star unleashed. The earth trembles. I felt my own heart tremble. Time dilates as friends align, as purposes converge. In that heartbeat, Evo and Shadow make their choice. Not compassion, they choose sacrifice. They move that cannon out beyond reach, away from the planet they've tormented, but cannot watch destroyed. The beam schemes beyond atmosphere, slicing a shard from the moon's face, a stunning, tragic echo of cosmic cost. Then space and light bloom, then fade. Sonic, drained of energy, slips into darkness, falling toward home. His consciousness flickers like a star going dark. But Tails and Knuckles, roots of loyalty and love, catch him with a portal open, gently placing him back among arms that awaited him in green hills. There, amid relief and bonds remade, Tom stirs, bruised but alive. Reconciliation hums like gentle rain. They gather, silent, relieved, myriad in their ways of expressing homecoming. Meanwhile, heads of state and commanders reassess the threads they pulled and the worlds tied together. In the ruins, Sonic's flicker of mercy has saved more than Earth. Maybe it saved broken hearts, too. And yet, the night's hush isn't quite still. It trembles with unresolved echoes. One moment, Sonic and his friends convene on a quiet forest edge, fingers entwined in camaraderie, eyes tempered by weariness and wonder. He laughs with Tails. Knuckles cracks a sharp grin. Tom and Maddie exchange glances rich with unspoken relief. Then their laughter drifts apart. Into the night, into the realms already shifting. A ring opens not to Green Hills, not to London, but to someplace busy and bright, a city without myth or memories. Sonic steps through to find himself surrounded by gleaming towers and restless crowds. He's disoriented, blinking in neon. Before him, robots designed like him, mirror images, march toward him with unflinching intent. My chest thumped when I saw it unfold. The familiar becoming uncanny, the chase renewed in a city he never expected. But then, through the crowd, strides someone small and capable, a hedgehog with a hammer. She swings. She clears the path. She saves him. Silence blossoms in the space between their eyes. Recognition blooms. Possibility turns. A new chapter beckons. Another world, another ally, another story to be told. And somewhere else, off-scene shadow stirs. Alive. His loneliness has not broken him, but transformed him. Carrying grief forward, not backward. A promise unspoken hangs his wake. I could feel the weight and lift of that ending. The resolution born of mercy, the world saved by empathy, the hope renewed by sacrifice. And I sense the hum of stories yet to unfold, of friendships yet to be forged, of myth yet to be rewritten. That, dear friends, is where our story pauses, not with finality, but with possibility. Not at the end, but at the edge. Not because the danger has vanished, but because new connections have taken root, and because light, even when buried in grief, still chooses a return. And in that return, perhaps all of us have felt the same echo. There comes a moment in a story when the characters feel less like creations and more like old friends whose echoes drape softly over your own memories. Here, in that warm hush between adventure and aftermath, these figures emerge, not as archetypes, but as beings of heart, conflict, and transformation. At the story's luminous center stands Sonic, brisk as a flash of cobalt, irrepressible in motion, brimming with clever quips and radiant energy. But beneath that sparkling surface, I glimpsed something tender, a creature rooted in openness, yearning to connect. He's more than fast. He's curious, irrepressibly hopeful in a way that reminded me of childhood mornings, when every moment felt possible. What struck me so deeply was how he shoulders leadership with a lightness that isn't evasive, but deliberate. His bravado may seem impulsive, but it's rooted in care, an echo of the loyalty he nurtures in his found family. Watching him struggle to guide his friends without overshadowing them, it felt like watching someone discover that strength and gentleness can harmonize, and that such harmony can be fierce. Then there's Tails, gentle and brilliant, an inventor whose mind hums with unspoken dreams. I always felt he wore admiration like a soft cloak. He looks at Sonic not with envy, but with longing to match that freedom, that light. And yet he's already luminous in his own way. His hands crafting hope, his loyalty a quiet engine that keeps the team alight. Tails isn't reckless like Sonic, nor hardened like Knuckles. He's a soothing note in a discordant song, grounding, kind, vital. In moments of chaos, his calm steadies. In moments of despair, his ingenuity guides. I feel for him, because I know the ache of wanting to be as bold as your friend, and the power of discovering that you already are. Knuckles, fiery, steadfast, a warrior shaped by duty, feels entirely different from Sonic's speed. Where Sonic is wind-charmed, Knuckles is carved of mountain and stone. He speaks little, but there's weight in every gesture. Loyalty carved in muscle, earnestness edged in caution. What resonated for me is how he tempers himself around Sonic, not smothering, but testing limits. He's the necessary strength, the reality check, the friend who lets you fall then helps you up. And I recognize that dynamic in my own friendships. The friend who isn't flashy, but strong enough to hold you when everything blurs. Shadow emerges shrouded in grief, that weight we all bend under at some point. His fur is dark, but it's not menace that marks him. It's loss. His fury is not villainy, but mourning made sharp. I felt that, not with fear, but with understanding. He's not a foil only. He's a mirror. Where Sonic runs toward hope, Shadow retreats into memory. Where Sonic's voice rings with jest, Shadow's is heavy with what was taken. Their conflict, so beautifully rendered, becomes a conversation of wounds, not just wills. And when Sonic offers mercy, remembering his own loss of Longclaw, that's what dissolves the chasm. It's not just power that wins, but recognition. That's the moment Shadow softens, not because he was wrong, but because he was seen. Dr. Robotnik and Gerald, the echo and the origin of mischief turned misanthropy, are, in a way, two spins of the same sorrow. Robotnik is bombast, the explosion of a misguided genius. Gerald is the silent collapse that precedes it. Their comedy is manic, over the top. But beneath the silliness, I felt a hunger for recognition, for leaving a mark on a world that overlooks you. Jim Carrey. I was struck by how he could be absurd and chilling in the same breath. As Robotnik, he's cartoonish chaos. As Gerald, he's grizzled grief with godlike catalyst. One bounces, one broods, but both bleed desperation for control and meaning. That duality, made humorous, terrifying human. It's rare to find in a family-friendly blockbuster. It reminded me of how we all skirt edges between laughter and lament, sometimes in the same exhale. Agent Stone, steady, quiet, a tether to normalcy when everything pirouettes into the fantastical. Though sidelined, he's the palate cleanser you need in moments. So loud you forget gentleness exists unless he's there. He's a calm acknowledgement that sometimes it's enough to stand firm and watch your friends light the world. Then there's Evo, scrambling between ambition and soft longing for a bond with his grandfather. He's the type of villain who laughs, but also mourns, who wants to conquer, but maybe also misses what family meant before the gears turned. I fell for that too, the child tethered to a broken version of love. And in the end, when he turns on Gerald, not purely out of heroism, but out of pain that says, I will not be this broken, that act of defiance felt real. All of these characters, in their allegiances and fights, feel cracked, questioning, striving. What holds them together is connection. Sonic, in his reckless warmth, pursues it. Tails, with gentle brilliance, builds it. Knuckles, with protected strength, upholds it. Shadow, through grief, discovers it anew. Robotnik and Gerald, in their twisted artifice, betray how much they once needed it. Agent Stone, in quiet service, anchors it. Evo, in betrayal, seeks it. That tapestry of longing, untethered, yearning, found, betrayed, reclaimed, that is the beating heart of the story. These characters aren't just players. They are resonances of our own impulses. To run, to remember, to build, to protect, to mend. And in their choices, I saw reminders of resilience, of mercy, of what it means to live at the edges of loss and find light again. In that reflective silence, I find gratitude for these animated souls, for the voices that breathe their edges alive, for fragments of myth that feel familiar, anchored. And in that gratitude, a soft recognition, their story echoes not only in the credits, but in the small turns and tensions of our own journeys. Sometimes, the most enchanting parts of the story aren't those we see on screen, but the little sparks that flickered in mid-production, tiny stories that seem too wild to be true. Let me take you on a journey through one such constellation of moments, where the surreal and unexpected became part of the creative heartbeat behind the film. The strangest thread begins with Jim Carrey. Imagine him sitting in a chair, hair flowing for over a year and a half. Then, in front of natural light cameras rolling, his co-star, Lee Majdoub, Agent Stone, takes scissors and an electric razor and shaves him bald. Yes, that jaw-dropping transformation in the film where Robotnik reverts to his iconic bald self, That was real. Carrey had truly grown his hair out, and that on-camera shade became part of the movie. Not just stunt or makeup, but spectacle and generosity in one. Majdaub later said he was terrified, yet honored to do it. It remains a moment of mutual trust and cinematic magi. That same willingness to push boundaries echoes in Carrey's return to role itself. After hinting at retirement following the second film, he famously joked that he'd only return if given a script written in gold ink. He chose to come back, cradling both Robotnik and his grandfather Gerald in one performance. Why? In Robert's own words, he needs the money. It's as human and unexpected as any plot twist. An A-list star motivated by scenes and personal pragmatism, investing fully in dual roles, both comedic caricature and tragic genius. Meanwhile, on a sillier note, the film almost turned pungent, in a playful, canine sort of way. The director admitted Ozzy, Sonic's dog, had far more subtitles during editing. One of the lost captions? Ozzy barking. Make sure you pee on everything you can. It was cut mercifully. But can you imagine the Dog Days punchline that almost made the theaters? Then there's Keanu Reeves, whose arrival as Shadow wasn't just a casting call. It was a fulfillment of a dream 2 decades in crafting. The director Jeff Fowler had first animated Shadow back in 2003 for a game cinematic, and finally got to bring him to life on the big screen. That's a full circle the size of a blazing star. Krina didn't just voice the role. He helped shape it, pitching the now famous "Who am I? Who are you?" exchange that captures Shadow's aloof edge without leaning into caricature. The visual world behind the film was equally unusual in its logistics. Filming had to begin amid the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike. So animators started shooting scenes in Surrey, England in July, while live-action camera crews waited till November in London. This shift meant an experimental dance between animation and performance, weaving them together under tight creative constraints. Even the animation itself was a kind of curious mosaic. 6 studios, Rising Sun Pictures, Industrial Light and Magic, Rodeo FX, plus Paramount's in-house team, shared the workload, working in sync to maintain Sonic's signature swagger across every frame. On set, puppets were more than stand-ins. They were collaborators. Child actor Ala Brown, who plays Maria, often worked opposite puppeteers whose ad-libs delivered moment of raw emotion that stuck in edit. The music carried its own legendary weight. Tom Hokenborg, returning to compose, brought back Crush 40's iconic theme, Live and Learn, a musical leitmotif woven through Shadow's arc, from Maria's guitar introduction to climactic supersonic/Shadow transformation. Fans waited. Rumors swirled that maybe the violence would earn a PG-13. But no, it stayed in PG territory, walking that tightrope between mythic darkness and broad appeal. Even small visual nods bubbled under the surface. Character posters of Tails and Shadow set in Tokyo hid katakana billboards spelling Sonic Time Shadow Times as a stylish echo. Legend has it that during a nostalgic flashback, glimpse on a TV screen, you can spot the Biolizard, a boss from Sonic Adventure 2, playing in a movie watched by Shadow and Maria. And on a meta note, Shadow's motorcycle in Tokyo is actually a Ducati Panigale V4 SP, the very bike Reeves rode in Matrix Resurrections, though the production musingly slapped a BMW logo over it. Then there are the delightful inconsistencies, goofs, if you will. For instance, in one scene Shadow revs the throttle on the left grip of his bike, though real bikes don't work that way. In a moment of unintentional humor, Robotnik streams a video, and a bus randomly enters the frame behind Agent Stone. There's even a pronunciation slip. Gerald mispronounces Euler as Euler when discussing the elegance of mathematics. The film places a song from 1989 in a scene set in 1974. The ambulance sounds in London come straight from American sirens. All these odd mismatches become part of the tapestry, imperfect, charming, strangely cathartic. Notably, this is the first film in the trilogy released globally in IMAX, and the first time Carrey has played the same character across more than 2 films, marking the franchise's evolving ambition. And amid all this, the franchise quietly planted seeds for what's to come. Parameters for a 4th movie were signed off on even before the 3rd premiered, a testament to how much Sonic has grown in both scope and heart. All right, let's sink into this one slowly, like a conversation that starts over coffee and drifts deep into the night. The kind where the film is just a doorway and everything else is a corridor beyond. When I think back on the film, what lingers most isn't simply the spectacle, though there's plenty, but the way certain events breathe in the room, the way they hang there, heavy or light, asking you to keep looking. You know that feeling when you walk away from a story and realize a moment you thought was just cool was actually a narrative keystone? This film is dense with those kind of moments, and revisiting them feels a bit like walking through a gallery where the frames rearrange themselves as you move. The opening scene alone feels like an artistic mission statement, brisk, self-assured, and deliberately theatrical. The cinematography doesn't rush to impress you. Instead, it lets you linger in the in-between spaces, the flickers of hesitation between characters, the way the sound design draws attention to little details that shouldn't matter but somehow do. It's as if the filmmakers were saying, yes, this is a story about speed, but don't mistake that for hurry. That juxtaposition becomes one of the film's undercurrents. How velocity and stillness can share the same space. Then there's the first confrontation between our hero and his newest adversary. On the surface, it's a kinetic marvel. Stunning visual effects, rhythmically timed beats of action, and dialogue that's sharp enough to cut glass. But when you step back, the real heartbeat of the scene isn't the exchange of blows. It's the unspoken exchange of philosophies. The hero's every move, quick and improvisational, is laced with adaptability, while the rival's attacks are calculated, almost mathematically precise. This isn't just a fight. It's a visual essay on chaos versus order, spontaneity versus predetermined design. One of the most fascinating shifts comes midway, when the story pivots into a quieter, more vulnerable register. The color grading subtly warms, the editing slows, and we're allowed to see characters in moments of hesitation, doubt, and reflection. A certain flashback sequence feels almost painterly in its restraint. Soft edges, a muted palette, the camera lingering on facial expressions like it's reading a diary without permission. And it's here that we begin to feel the weight of legacy, of promises made long before the current players even entered the stage. It's the kind of moment that transforms a fast-paced adventure into something richer, a generational story about unfinished business. The introduction of the secondary villain, more of a shadowed presence than an active disruptor at first, strikes a chord in me because it's handled with such deliberate ambiguity. We're never spoon-fed their full intention. Instead, we receive fragments, a gesture here, a sharp glance there, a line of dialogue that sounds innocuous until you replay it in your mind later. This technique pulls the audience into the role of active interpreter. It's as if the director is saying, I trust you to read between the lines, and that trust deepens our engagement. But what I find most haunting is how the story handles betrayal. There's a key moment where trust is shattered, not with melodramatic flourishes, but with a painfully understated action. The scene unfolds almost too casually, as if the world is indifferent to the emotional devastation taking place. The score barely swells. Instead, the soundscape lets the environment hum around the characters, emphasizing their isolation. And when an emotional blow lands, it's not an explosion. It's a quiet collapse, which, in some ways, feels even more devastating. This restraint becomes a film's strength. By refusing to demand our tears, it earns them. Thematically, the narrative builds itself on twin pillars: identity and legacy. Characters grapple with questions of who they are when stripped of their speed, their power, or their carefully constructed masks. In some of the most compelling exchanges, two characters mirror each other's doubts without realizing it, each trying to outrun their past in opposite directions. This creates a beautiful irony. Their paths are different, but the shadow chasing them is the same. From a structural standpoint, one of the boldest choices is a layering of conflicts, personal, ideological, and physical, so that they converge at nearly the same moment. There's a climactic sequence where all these threads come together, and while it plays as high-octane spectacle, its emotional scaffolding is surprisingly delicate. Characters make choices in that moment that will define them for years to come, and those choices are not always the ones we expect. There's genuine bravery in allowing a hero to make a decision that isn't crowd-pleasing but thematically truthful. The final act walks a tightrope between resolution and open-endedness. While the immediate danger is quelled, the emotional aftermath is far from tidy. We're left with fractured relationships, unanswered questions, and a lingering sense of to be continued, not in a marketing sense, but in a deeply human sense. After all, real conflicts rarely resolve cleanly. They ripple outward, reshaping everything in their path. This decision roots the story in a reality that makes it more resonant than a neatly wrapped finale could. From a critical lens, it's clear the filmmakers weren't merely chasing spectacle. They were sculpting it around thematic core truths. Every major event doubles as a thematic echo. Battles as metaphors for inner turmoil, alliances as commentaries on trust, and losses as reminders of the cost of standing still. Even the humor, often sharp and self-aware, serves as a shield for characters who can't yet articulate their pain. The emotional resonance, for me, comes from that interplay between the seen and the unseen. The way the narrative understands an audience with literary bent will relish the spaces between the lines as much as the lines themselves. When a character hesitates before speaking, when a scene ends a beat earlier than expected, when the camera lingers on a small, insignificant object, those are the moments that carry meaning beyond the frame. And by the end, we're not just thinking about what happened. We're thinking about why it mattered and what it says about us. It's rare for a big, high-energy blockbuster to pull off that balance, to give us thrilling set pieces while also offering a layered emotional experience that continues to unfold in our minds long after credits roll. But this one manages it by trusting that its audience isn't afraid of complexity, that we want to be engaged not only in heart-pounding chases, but in quiet reckonings. And maybe that's why the events hit as hard as they do. Because beneath the color and chaos, there's an honesty that feels rare. Sometimes the most unforgettable parts of a story aren't what we see on screen. They're the tiny off-camera moments that sparkle in the memory. Let me take you behind the curtain of this Sonic adventure, as though you're seated beside me while I recount everything from midnight makeup sessions to cross-continental animation marathons. The day I first learned that Jim Carrey had grown his hair out for a year and a half, only to have it shaved off in front of the camera, that moment reframed everything for me. Picture the set. Lights blazing, energy humming, and there's Carrey, sporting hair almost heavy enough to be a character itself. And then, with a pair of scissors and an electric razor, Agent Stone, a.k.a. Lee Majdow, begins a cut. Carrey laughs, trusting the actor beside him to sculpt his image, a playful knife edge between spontaneous fun and sculptural intent. When the shorn moments make it the big screen, it's not just a prop, it's a ritual. He returns to that iconic Robotnik baldness, and we feel it. Real. Earned. A transformation that breathes with life. It's more than performance. It's communion. And Carrey doesn't just come back for Robotnik. He comes back for both Robotnik and Gerald. Two roles, two souls bound in dysfunction, played by a man who once supposed he was done with acting. In truth, he said, he just needed the money. It's deliciously candid, comedic genius informed by real finances, and it breeds warmth, not cynicism. You see the artist offering himself, not for art's sake alone, but for practical, all too human reasons. And yet, the performance transcends the why, weaving laughter and menace into one. The director, Jeff Fowler, talks about that dual ask. Carrey spending long hours in makeup, transforming into both characters, each with distinct effect, voice, and weight of grief or gleeful malice. It's a testament to trust. The actor trusting the team to guide his transformations, and the team trusting him to carry them with nuance and abandon. Fowler himself has a momentous arc. When he began his career at Blur Studio, he was crafting cinematic sequences for the early video game that birthed Shadow. 2 decades later, here he is, bringing that same character, Shadow dark, conflicted, mythic, to life on the big screen. That's a full-circle moment that hums with gratitude and story, as if the medium itself whispered, still here, still dreaming. Enter Keanu Reeves, quiet, contemplative, shadow-shaped. When he stepped into booth to voice Shadow, he didn't just read lines, he inhabited them. Fowler shares that Reeves offered multiple takes, variations in tone, in inflection, in emotional distance, and the team listened. They followed. His thoughtful darkness grounded Shadow, giving weight to every line. And then there was that delightful detail. Shadow's favorite food? Coffee beans. Hard, compact, jarring, like the character himself. Shadow isn't just voiced. He's integrated. His motorcycle, his handheld weapon. These are gestures lifted from gameplay and myth. When he appears, the energy changes, not only for Sonic and company, but in the creases of the audience's memory. It's a character reborn, slow burn from foam to flesh. But let's step back to another battleground, the animation studios. 6 of them, including Rising Sun Pictures, ILM, Rodeo FX, and Paramount's in-house team, fracture the globe yet fuse their talents together, stitching Sonic's electric swagger into each frame. It's a feat of coordination, of energy and trust, and one misaligned movement can fracture sequence. The supervisor, Clem Yip, says they lived on communication cross-checks, storyboard by Tyson Hesse, and perhaps absurd belief that obstacles only sharpen artistry. And sharpen they did. Sonic can't be half-hearted. His motion must sing, whether blistering speed or unexpected tenderness. Then there are the puppets. Eye on the life made of wires and felt who stands in for our CG hedgehog on set, especially when he confronts Maria. Alola Brown, the young actor, leaned into that puppet, shared space with it. Puppeteers ad-libbed lines, gestures, tiny sparks, not scripted but honest enough to make it to the final cut. It's a reminder that the unseen crew, the puppet masters, are silent narrators of authenticity. And did you know that the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike tilted their schedule? Animated sequences were filmed first in Surrey in July, while live action waited till November in London. The team made time, and time made magic. In another twist of color and chaos, Jim Carrey was given free rein to improv. The director would call out, "Go crazy," and Carrey would, a blur of physicality, angle changes, comic lunacy. On Reddit, fans joked the script must have been 24-karat gold, because so much of what Carrey delivered felt like liquid spontaneity. And it worked. Those moments became viral, joyful, oddly grounding in a story defined by speed and spectacle. One of the best scenes in the entire third movie was this one. A late-night ripple from fans. They loved that Carrey had more scenes than even the title hero trio. One fan writes, "I'm a Sonic fan, but a bigger Jim Carrey fan, and was honestly happy that Dr. Robotnik had way more screen time than Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Shadow." That speaks to how production choices, amplifying character, letting spontaneity in shape reception. Carrey didn't just support the story. Sometimes he was a story. We should also talk sound. Tom Hokenborg returned to score the film, finishing by July 2024. And he brought Live and Learn, the anthem of Sonic Adventure 2, into the tapestry. Maria's guitar, Shadow, Shadow, Sonic's climax. That riff pulses like a leitmotif, evoking game nostalgia without resorting to parody. Johnny Gioeli from Crush 40 confirmed the inclusion, and Jelly Roll Single Run It helped drive trailers. Even One OK Rock's Neon found its way in. Music became both homage and heartbeat. Then there are the trivia bits, subtle and joyful. Character posters placed in Tokyo background with katakana billboards splashing Sonic Time Shadow. Or a Virtua Fighter cabinet in Dreamcast console that were meant to be Easter eggs in the credits scene. Scrap for flow, but almost there. And there were ideas for Amy Rose's return, but not enough space. Shadow's story needed his moment. And back when the first movie Sonic was redesigned in response to backlash. Yes, that meant overwork, new skeletons, animation rigs retooled, and consequences heavy enough to shutter a studio's Vancouver branch. People online quote, "He literally showed up to work to find a locked door and 100 coworkers looking confused on the sidewalk." That level of passion laced with price reminds us, making this look playful required pushing limits far beyond the screen. Ill-considered design invited reimagination, for the sake of the fans, yes, but at human cost. Let's pull back and breathe. What these glimpses show, Carrey's trust, Reeves' subtlety, Fowler's decade-long whisper-to-shout of Shadow, the way puppetry rekindled emotional beats, music that bet us on nostalgia without laziness, animation teams spread across continents yet one heartbeat, is that nothing is accidental here. Every frame might shimmer, but it's lit with humanity. Standing back, you sense how all these stories matter, how spectacle, when tethered to trust, becomes intimacy, how fandom, when listened to, becomes partnership, how an actor's whimsy becomes canon, how quiet persistence births global scale. And most of all, you feel this. The film sparkles not just because of speed or effect, but because it carries a slow burn of creative hearts who share their stride. All right, let's step into the world itself now. Not merely the story told, but the places where it breathes. Because for me, the most magical part of this whole cinematic journey wasn't always the characters. It was where they existed. Sometimes I think of settings as the bones of a film. Without them, the story would still move, but would be floppy, shapeless, and unsteady. Here, though, the bones are sculpted with such deliberation, such personality, that they almost speak before a single line of dialogue is uttered. From the very first moment, the film places you in a liminal space, half real, half imagined. The streets of Green Hills have a kind of Norman Rockwell charm, but that charm is fractured by sudden bursts of chaos. Colors so saturated they feel like someone just tore open a box of childhood crayons. Every mailbox, lamppost, and patch of cracked pavement seems to hold the potential for either tranquility or total disaster. It's small-town Americana at first glance, but one storm cloud of speed or conflict can tilt the whole frame into something wilder. Then the film leaps. We're in zones so alien they can't belong to Earth, not really. Jagged peaks rise into skies that seem to warp around them, swirling like they've been pulled from an artist's fever dream. Caverns hum with a low, impossible light, walls breathing in blues and purples that suggest a world alive beneath the rock. The production design doesn't just show us a place. It makes us feel the physical and emotional temperature of it. In the colder spaces, the air almost bites. In the warmer ones, the camera lingers in sunbeams that spill across dust motes, like an invitation to rest. What struck me most was how the settings changed not only with location but with emotional stakes. The brighter, open-air landscapes of early scenes give way to tighter, shadowed corridors as the tension builds. By the middle of the film, the spaces feel almost claustrophobic. Yes, even in wide outdoor shots, because the cinematography begins to frame the characters tighter, cropping the environment just enough to suggest a narrowing path. This is how the setting becomes a kind of silent narrator, telling us, the options are running out. The city sequences, oh, those are masterclass in motion. Rather than drowning us in chaos, the filmmakers choose specific points of visual focus, letting bright neon signage or a flicker of shadowed movement guide the audience's eye. It's organized chaos, the kind of framing that feels like you're in a moving comic panel. Every street feels alive with vertical layers. Billboards looming above, street vendors at eye level, puddles on the ground catching fractured reflections of characters running past. There's even a moment where the entire emotional beat hinges on one of those reflections, and I remember leaning forward in my seat when I caught it. The action sequences set in natural environments are shot with a different philosophy entirely. The camera pulls back, not to show you everything, but to remind you how small the characters really are against these grand, impossible landscapes. You get that sense of scale, that here in this place, the stakes aren't just about survival, they're about significance. There's a particular desert scene that still lingers in my mind, not just because of what happens in it, but because of how it's framed. The horizon is pushed so far back, the sky so pale and bleached by heat, that the characters look like flecks of grit in an endless expanse. And then as conflict rises, the camera dives in, heat shimmer blurring the edges, giving you that dizziness you feel after staring into the sun for too long. That's cinematography as storytelling, not just illustration. Color theory plays a constant, deliberate role here. Early sequences lean on the high-contrast primaries, reds, blues, and yellows that pop like panels from a 90s comic book. As the tension ratchets up, though, the palette begins to mute. Colors desaturate, shadows deepen, and the blues start edging toward indigo and black. The shift is so gradual you might not consciously notice it, but you feel it, like a slow tightening in your chest. Lighting, too, is used as a kind of emotional compass. In moments of hope, light floods in from multiple directions, giving every surface a soft halo. In moments of doubt, illumination comes from a single directional source, often backlighting the characters, so their faces are cast in shadow, even in broad daylight. I love when a film trusts us enough to read light the same way we read dialogue. Here, it's not decoration, it's subtext. One of my favorite touches is how the film transitions between settings. They're rarely straight cuts. Instead, it often uses motion, running through a portal, bursting through a collapsing wall, sliding under an obstruction, so that the setting changes mid-movement. It's like the locations are stitched together by the momentum of the story itself. The pacing of those transitions is so precise that you feel carried, almost yanked, into the next chapter. The climactic location is one of those unforgettable places that sits somewhere between nightmare and dream. Its design is layered with contradictions, metallic surfaces but organic curves, deep shadows interrupted by blinding flashes, a constant low thrumming audio that makes your pulse sink to it without you realizing. The camera refuses to give you the full geography of it. Instead, you're shown fragments, towering spires here, shifting machinery there, until final confrontation, when the frame finally pulls wide enough to reveal the full scope. By then, the reveal isn't just visual, it's emotional payoff. The sound design works in tandem with setting, making each space sound distinct. The desert has an almost oppressive silence, broken by the crunch of boots and the hiss of wind. City streets hum with layered audio, distant car horns, muffled voices through open windows, an occasional dog barking off-screen. In the alien landscapes, the audio mix becomes stranger. Frequencies hum at the edge of perception, so subtle that you might think you imagine them. That's how the film cues your subconscious. Some places are meant to unsettle you. One thing that felt personal to me was how the smaller, more intimate settings weren't neglected. There's a tiny cafe scene, barely a minute long, that does so much with so little. The lighting here is warm, golden, low contrast. The walls are crowded with knickknacks, framed photos slightly crooked, mugs hanging from mismatched hooks. The way the camera lingers on steam curling up from a coffee cup tells you everything about the emotional breathing space this location offers. It's a sanctuary before the storm. Then there's the way the setting interacts with the characters. The physical world isn't just a backdrop. It responds. Dust swirls differently depending on who's running. Reflections warp slightly depending on emotional tension. Even something as simple as rain behaves differently from one scene to the next. Sometimes soft and mournful, sometimes pounding and aggressive, driven sideways by an unseen wind. You can feel the environment aligning itself with the tone of each moment, like a silent partner in the storytelling. And, of course, the portals. They're more than visual effects. They're visual punctuation. The portals connect locations that could never touch in real life, and yet their design keeps them feeling like part of a single world. The swirling edges, the faint shimmer that bleeds into surrounding objects, the way light from one location spills into another. This is visual grammar. It's the cinematic equivalent of semicolon, a pause that's still connected to what came before. What makes the settings truly memorable is their internal consistency. Even when jumping from a sleepy rural town to a high-tech alien fortress, there's a thread, a certain exaggeration of scale, a heightened saturation, a slightly stylized framing that makes it all feel like one coherent universe. This is where production design, cinematography, and visual effects converge into one voice. By the end, when the dust literally settles, you look back and realize that the settings have been telling a parallel story. They've mirrored emotional highs and lows, hinted at danger before it arrived, and expanded the scope when the story needed to breathe. They've been both stage and silent actor, shaping the way we feel about every beat without ever demanding credit. For me, that's the magic. Not just that the film showed us extraordinary places, but that it trusted us to feel them, sometimes before we even understood why. And in that way, the settings become part of our own memory of the story, inseparable from the characters and events we came to see. It's funny. When you watch a movie from the audience's side, the magic feels like it happens in the moment. A character makes you laugh, a scene makes you gasp, a shot leaves you breathless. But behind that 2-hour stretch of seamless story is an entire hidden world where nothing is truly seamless. And that, for me, is where the other kind of magic lives, not in perfection, but in the people, the accidents, and the unplanned moments that somehow become part of the final picture. I remember hearing from a crew member that the set itself was like a strange mix of summer camp and controlled chaos. Every morning, there was this odd ritual. The day's shooting schedule will be taped up near the coffee table in the corner of the production tent, and the first person to grab a cup of coffee, had the unofficial duty of shouting the day's first good morning, like a town crier. You could tell instantly whether it was going to be a high-energy day or a tense one just from the tone of that greeting. One of the first fun stories I learned was about a prop that became an accidental mascot for the crew. It was supposed to be a small, decorative item in the background of a single scene, barely noticeable. But during rehearsals, someone knocked it over, and instead of breaking, it rolled right across the set and bumped into the lead actor's shoe in perfect comedic timing. Everyone burst out laughing. The director loved it, and from that point forward, the prop would mysteriously appear somewhere in every location they shot. A little private game for the crew, but if you watch closely, you can spot it. The cast interactions were nothing short of a traveling family. Between takes, you'd have the lead actors, already in full costume, leaning against set walls, sipping tea and joking about how ridiculous they felt in certain scenes. There was a kind of unspoken understanding that everyone, from the stars to the sound techs, had a role with the film's unique rhythm. On high-speed chase days, that meant 12 hours of intense focus, followed by bursts of laughter over a flub line or an unexpected background extra who didn't quite hit their mark. The voice actors, and here's something many people don't realize, weren't just in sound booths the whole time. For certain sequences, they were brought onto set, standing just behind the camera, delivering lines live, so the physical performers could match timing and emotion. It added this raw, immediate energy to scenes, and more than once, it led to moments that had everyone behind the camera grinning like kids. Of course, not everything was easy. One of the biggest challenges was coordinating stunts that merged live action with CGI-heavy elements. There's a desert chase sequence in the film that looks effortless on screen, but in reality, it was a logistical puzzle worthy of a math textbook. They were filming on an actual location, which meant dealing with wind that would pick up out of nowhere, throwing sand into cameras and creating a sound nightmare. The cinematographer joked that they had more sand and equipment than in the actual desert. The fix? A combination of custom lens shields, on-the-spot rewrites to match the weather, and an assistant director who became frighteningly good at predicting when gusts would hit. Weather wasn't the only unpredictable factor. There was a city night scene that needed a certain amount of street wetness to get that shimmering neon reflection look. Problem was, by the time the cameras rolled, the water truck that was supposed to wet down the street had gotten stuck in traffic 2 blocks away. Rather than delay, the crew scrambled for hoses and buckets, filling them from nearby businesses. Imagine a group of production assistants and lighting techs in headsets and work boots, dashing up and down a street at midnight with buckets of water. They finished just in time, and the scene ended up looking like it had been shot after a perfect light rain. One of the most surprising behind-the-scenes friendships formed between the stunt team and the art department. Normally, those groups don't cross paths much, but here, stunt performers often had to interact directly with large set pieces, meaning the art team had to design props that could take a hit without injuring anyone, yet still look completely solid on camera. I was told about a day where they tested a collapsing wall by running at it full speed, over and over, until it gave way in just the right way, without sending dangerous debris flying. After the final take, the stunt lead and the head set designer hugged like they'd just won a championship game. And then there was the food. Every production has catering, but here, they went a little above and beyond. One of the producers apparently had a personal philosophy that good food equals better morale. So each week, a different theme menu was introduced. Taco trucks on Mondays, sushi on Wednesdays, barbecue Fridays. The cast joked that they could chart their energy levels by how spicy lunch had been. During one particularly long shoot day, they even had an ice cream cart roll up just as the sun was setting. Right before the most emotional scene of the day, more than one crew member admitted to holding back tears, but not entirely from the acting. Not every challenge was physical. There were also the endless creative debates, the kind that happen on every film, but here they were especially passionate. Should a scene be shot in warm or cool light? Should a character pause for a beat before delivering a certain line? These discussions could stretch for hours, but the thing that struck me was how respectful they remained. You could tell there was a shared understanding that every choice mattered, even down to the color of a background prop. The director had a habit of giving notes in metaphors rather than technical language. Instead of saying, make the camera angle wider, they'd say, let's open this scene up so it breathes more. Instead of, we need more intensity. It was, imagine the floor is shaking beneath you. It could be confusing at first, but once everyone tuned into their wavelength, it created this shared creative shorthand. The result was scenes that felt alive, not over-rehearsed. One day, during a particularly complex effects setup, the whole shoot ground to a halt because one of the tracking markers, used for CGI alignment, had mysteriously vanished. It turned out that someone had mistaken it for a sticker and stuck it on their coffee cup. By the time they realized, the cup was already in the trash, under half a dozen donut boxes. Retrieving it was a rescue mission of its own, complete with a cheer from the crew when it was found. There's a quiet beauty in how the cast and crew learned to read each other. When someone was having an off day, there'd be an unspoken shift. Others would pick up slack, crack a joke, or silently make sure that person got first dibs on the next snack run. You can't fake that kind of camaraderie, and I think it's part why the final film feels so warm in places, even when the action is at full tilt. Another small but telling detail. Every Friday afternoon, after the final take, the sound team would play a little snippet of music over the speakers before rap was called. Sometimes it was a 90s pop hit, sometimes a dramatic orchestral swell. It became a ritual, one that sent everyone home for the weekend smiling, no matter how grueling the week had been. And maybe that's a real secret to this film's behind-the-scenes magic. It wasn't just about the big, high-tech set pieces or the perfectly timed stunts. It was about the people, how they navigated chaos together, turned accidents into running jokes, and found ways to make long, exhausting days feel like something worth remembering. By the time shooting wrapped, they weren't just colleagues. They were a little like the story they'd been telling. Different personalities thrown together, each with their quirks and challenges, somehow making it all work against the odds. And maybe that's why, when you watch the movie, you can feel something underneath the polish. A heartbeat that belongs to every person who was there when the cameras weren't rolling. I've always believed that when a film stays with you long after the credits roll, it's not just because of its story beats or performances. It's because it whispered, or sometimes shouted, something deeper. It left traces, symbols, ideas that cling to the corners of your mind, like the afterimage of light when you close your eyes. This one, well, it's still with me. Days later, I find myself replaying moments not for the spectacle, but for what they seem to be saying underneath the noise. The first thing that struck me was a persistent current of identity running through the narrative, not just the obvious, surface-level who am I, but the thornier, more intimate who am I when no one is looking. The film presents its characters in these bold, almost caricatured introductions, and then slowly peels back those layers. What fascinated me was how the environment seemed to change as characters grew more self-aware. In the early scenes, the spaces are sharply defined, boundaries everywhere. Corridors, fences, clear lines between safety and danger. As the story progresses and certain characters break free from those self-imposed limits, the cinematography shifts. The framing becomes looser, skies wider, colors more untamed. And then there's a recurring symbol of speed. Yes, on the surface it's literal, tied the action, but also works as a metaphor for the way we try to outrun ourselves, mistakes, doubts, fears. Watching characters blur past landscapes almost too fast to notice, I couldn't help thinking about how much of life we rush through without really seeing it. There's a particularly striking scene where a chase suddenly slows into near stillness, every motion elongated, and it's as if the story itself is demanding we stop, look, feel. It's that old literary trick. Pace as meaning. Another thread woven deeply into film is trust. And not the easy kind, but the kind that comes with risk. It's there in the uneasy alliances, the moments when someone has to leap without knowing if the other will catch them. The symbol that carries this theme most elegantly is the hand. Hands appear in moments of choice, gripping, letting go, reaching out, pulling back. It's subtle, but once you notice, it's everywhere. Hands clutching controls, brushing against relics, trembling before contact. That repeated image works almost like a refrain in poetry, giving the film a pulse beyond its plot. Nature versus machine is another obvious, yet surprisingly layered theme. On paper, it sounds straightforward. Organic life clashing with cold, artificial systems. But the film plays with it, blurring the lines. Some of the most natural moments, sunlight filtering through leaves, a river bending through rock, are revealed to be illusions, manufactured environments. Likewise, some mechanical creations exhibit startling warmth or instinct, almost as if the boundary between the two worlds doesn't exist so clearly. I think this is a film's way of saying that purity is a myth. Everything is hybrid, tangled, messy. Color plays a huge role in the symbolism, too. There's a dominant blue that recurs throughout, often tied to freedom, movement, and possibility. But what's intriguing is how blue shifts in tone. Sometimes it's vibrant, alive. Other times it's cold, isolating. It's as if the film is acknowledging that even our most cherished ideals can become cages if we hold them too tightly. Warm colors, golds, oranges, tend to appear in moments of grounding, connection, and safety. The contrast between these palettes isn't just visual. It's emotional storytelling. I kept noticing circles, too. Round doorways, circular platforms, spiraling paths. Circles in literature are often tied to cycles, beginnings and endings folding into each other. But here they felt more like invitations. Every time a circle appeared, it marked a turning point or an opportunity. Sometimes it was a literal choice of direction. Other times it was a psychological one. It reminded me of the idea that life offers us the same lessons over and over until we choose to truly learn them. And perhaps my favorite symbol, the one that made me lean forward every time it appeared, was the mirror. They aren't used frequently, which makes each occurrence potent. The mirrors here are never simple reflections. They're distortions, shifts in perspective, reminders that what we see of ourselves might not be the whole truth. One particularly memorable moment has a character glance into a warped surface, not quite a mirror, but enough to catch a reflection and flinch, as though seeing not their face, but the weight of their choices. Thematically, the story leans into the inevitability of change. It's not presented as a gentle, graceful thing. It's messy, sometimes violent. Friendships fracture, loyalties bend, and even the landscape itself reshapes. The symbols reinforce this. Water, for instance, appears in trickles, torrents, and still pools. In its many forms, it reflects the adaptability required to survive, but also the force that can erode even the strongest foundation. One thing that stuck with me was how the film treats solitude. Often, characters are shown alone and wide, empty spaces before critical decisions. The isolation isn't presented as punishment, but as a crucible. It's in these moments that the most personal choices are made, not in the noise of battle, but in the silence of a single breath. The cinematography heightens this by pulling back just enough to make the figure small against the environment, yet still central in our gaze. Even the recurring technological motifs, wires, grids, screens, seem to carry a double meaning. At times they're barriers, other times they're lifelines. In one sequence, a character finds themselves caught in a literal web of glowing lines, and what starts as a trap becomes a map, guiding them forward. That transformation of meaning is something literature lovers will recognize. It's the objective symbol evolving with the character's arc. I can't ignore the symbolic weight of movement itself. Whether it's the kinetic rush of a chase or the hesitant shuffle of an uncertain step, movement is the heartbeat of the story. Stillness, when it happens, feels monumental, like the world is tilted into a new alignment. That rhythm, fast and slow, mirrors the emotional pacing of the character's growth. By the end, I realized that the film wasn't just telling a story about external conflict. It was telling a story about reconciliation between self and self, self and others, self and the world. The symbols aren't ornamental. They're the connective tissue holding everything together. They speak in a language that bypasses dialogue, going straight to the part of the audience that feels rather than thinks. And maybe that's why it lingers. Because while the spectacle fades, the undercurrent, the blue that shifts in meaning, the hands that reach or recoil, the circles that offer second chances, remains. They become part of your own symbolic vocabulary, so that when you see them in life, you remember. You remember the chase, the pause, the choice. You remember the story not as something you watched, but as something you briefly lived. There's something magical about peeling back the curtain on a film you've already absorbed as an audience member. You've laughed, gasped, maybe even teared up during certain moments. But then, When you start thinking about why you felt that way, you begin to notice the craft that shaped those emotions. This particular film wasn't content with simply delivering a series of well-executed action beats. It felt like every camera move, every sound cue, every cut was part of a grand design. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had been guided through the story by invisible hands. Steady, deliberate, and surprisingly intimate. Let's start with the camera work, because in many ways, it's the most immediate conversation between filmmaker and viewer. Here, the camera isn't just a passive observer. It's a participant, leaning into moment of tension and pulling back to give us space when emotions swell. Action sequences are often shot with a kinetic energy that mirrors the speed and unpredictability of the character's movements, but never so chaotic that you lose your bearings. That's a fine line, and it's walked beautifully. There's this clever push-and-pull rhythm to the cinematography, moments of dizzying motion contrasted with sudden stillness, like the world is catching its breath alongside you. One of the more subtle techniques that struck me was the frequent use of tracking shots to follow characters through varied environments. Instead of cutting quickly between angles, the camera often glides, giving us a sense of continuity and immersion. You start to feel the geography of the spaces, not just how they look, but how they breathe. And when the film does decide to cut abruptly, the impact is amplified because we've been lulled into that smooth motion. Lighting plays an equally crucial role in shaping the atmosphere. It's not just about illumination. It's about mood, symbolism, and sometimes even storytelling. Early scenes have a crisp, almost clinical brightness, as though the world is too exposed, too ordered. As conflicts deepen, the lighting shifts, shadows grow longer, highlights become sharper, and color temperatures fluctuate to mirror emotional shifts. Blue light often dominates moments of speed or introspection, while warm golden tones creep in during quiet, human exchanges. These choices aren't accidental. They're a silent dialogue between image and feeling. Sound design here deserves its own love letter. I kept noticing how often silence was used as a weapon, not just the absence of sound, but a deliberate stripping away of noise to draw our attention to something intimate or dangerous. Then, when sound roars back in, whether it's the whoosh of rapid movement, the deep thrum of engines, or the snap of mechanical parts, it hits with twice the force. There's also a layer into the sound that makes the world feel alive. Distant hums, environmental cues, faint echoes that suggest spaces beyond the frame. It's the kind of detail you might not consciously register in the moment, but your brain feels it, and it makes the setting richer. The musical score works almost like an emotional GPS. It doesn't simply tell you how to feel. It guides you toward it, leaving room for your own reaction. There are recurring motifs that become familiar over time, small melodies tied to specific characters or ideas, and their reappearances feel like seeing an old friend in a new place. In moment of tension, percussion often drives the pace, while strings or synths swell during moment of triumph or connection. The balance between orchestral warmth and electronic precision mirrors the thematic interplay between organic life and machine. Editing, meanwhile, is the unsung architect of the film's pacing. There's an intentionality in how long shots are allowed to breathe before cutting, and how sequences are interwoven to sustain both narrative clarity and emotional engagement. During high-intensity moments, the cuts become sharper, faster, creating a palpable sense of urgency. But just when you think the film will burn itself out on momentum, it eases back, allowing a long, steady shot to soak in an emotional beat. That control over rhythm is what keeps the experience from feeling exhausting. It's a dynamic ride, not a constant sprint. One of the things I deeply admire is how the filmmakers resist the temptation to overload every frame with action. Instead, they choose their moments, letting certain sequences play almost like dance choreography, precision in motion, but fluid and expressive. In a chase scene, for example, the framing isn't just about showing who's ahead. It's about showing why the moment matters. You'll see quick flashes of determination on a character's face, or the brief hesitation before a leap. It's the difference between spectacle and story-driven action. I also found the integration of visual effects into practical environments seamless. Too often, films lean so heavily on CGI that you feel the disconnect between actors and their surroundings. Here, the digital work feels grounded. Textures match, lighting blends, and the physicality of objects remains believable. It's not about showing off technology. It's about serving the story. Even in fantastical moments, there's a tactile sense that you could reach out and feel the world under your fingers. The choreography of movement, both character and camera, has this natural rhythm that almost feels musical. You can tell the stunt work and camera operators were in constant conversation, adjusting angles and timing to create a sense of momentum without losing clarity. It's particularly evident in moments where multiple characters are in motion, yet the frame always tells you exactly where to look. That's not luck. That's meticulous planning. Now, about the box office production side of things, it's fascinating to consider how all this artistry fits within the machinery of big-budget filmmaking. The project clearly had the resources to push boundaries, but what's remarkable is how those resources were used with restraint in certain areas and extravagance in others. Big set pieces were given the full weight of technical mastery, but smaller, more emotional moments were treated with the same care. It's easy to burn through budget on visual dazzle, but here, the money also went into fine-tuning details that most viewers would only absorb subconsciously: sound mixing, subtle animation tweaks, reel-it scenes to perfect the tone. The production schedule must have been a delicate dance in itself, balancing live-action shoots, post-production visual effects, and sound design while keeping everything cohesive. From what I've gathered, multiple teams worked in parallel, each focused on a different layer of the film's reality. The coordination required is staggering, yet the result feels unified, as though it all emerged from a single creative vision. Marketing and distribution strategies also played into the atmosphere of the release. The way trailers teased not just action, but mood suggested the filmmakers wanted audiences to expect more than a straightforward spectacle. That expectation shaped the way people approached the film, and, judging by the box office response, it worked. What I think made this film a success both artistically and commercially was its understanding of audience rhythm. It knew when to give you the rush you came for, and when to pull you into something quieter, more introspective. It's a rare balance. Often films either cater to pure adrenaline or pure emotion, but here, both coexist. That makes it rewatchable, because you're not just chasing the same high, you're finding new textures every time. Ultimately, the filmmaking techniques here aren't about calling attention to themselves. They're like the hidden stitching in a beautifully tailored jacket. You don't notice them unless you look closely, but without them, the whole thing would fall apart. Every shot, every sound, every edit has a purpose, and that, more than any single set piece or special effect, is what makes the atmosphere linger in your mind long after you've left the theater. Let's step into this as if recounting a gathering of storytellers, two joined voices, cast and audience, melding together in a warm, firelit room, their tales unfolding into something unforgettable. I remember reading that interview with Idris Elba and feeling like I'd been handed a key. He laughed gently as he described evolving Knuckles from that brusque, hyper-focused figure in the previous film into someone who softened, cracked the armor just a little. He talked about the dynamic, the brotherly love, rivalry, and the way Knuckles now finds humor and camaraderie with Sonic. That warmth in his voice? It was clear this wasn't just voice acting. It was a heartfelt reunion with a character who's found belonging. And then there's Ben Schwartz, whose tone carries both mischief and genuine care. When he admits he can tell which lines belong to Sonic or Tails, that devotion shines through. He knows their rhythms, their banter, their silences. In this installment, when Sonic stumbles into anger or doubt, Schwartz doesn't hit a note of performance. He hits a note of discovery. It's like watching someone learn parts of themselves in front of you. That kind of care weaves into every frame, making the character feel lived in rather than voiced over. Keanu Reeves, well, his entrance into the franchise as Shadow was more than a headline. It felt mythic. He spoke of Shadow's intensity, of that rare flame of anger beneath sorrow. He said he wanted the villain to have a good heart, even as he stood his threat. And when he laughed about choosing teleportation if he could, you heard the actor's playfulness tangling with fascination for the character. There's a softness there, a respect for the myth that made knock your sock off perfectly believable in this world. Reeves lent gravity to the role, yes, but also space. Space for echoes of pain, second chances, even redemption. Jim Carrey, coming out of retirement, joking about needing money after making a lot of purchases, all with that crooked Carrey grin. Then he steps onto the screen as two entirely different beings, mad scientists and grief-stricken genius, both rattling with unhinged comedic energy. You don't just watch Carrey, you breathe with his performance. It's erratic, insane, tender, and broken all at once. That dual role isn't a stunt. It's a raw display of his ability to hold both humor and despair in one frame. Then the audience enters the scene. I saw a post from someone whose theater erupted. Families cheering, laughter echoing off every wall. They wrote that kids cried from excitement. Adults howled with delight. In that packed room, Sonic wasn't just on screen. He was in their veins. Another recounted being the lone adult among adult fans, cheering like a child, unabashed. That kind of reaction, it's rare. It's wild and joyous and real. And yet in some other theaters, the response was quieter. A viewer wrote about normally being annoyed by kids' chatter, but in this case, a child's voice, barely a whisper of that shadow, made their heart leap, that moment of shared recognition. The simple thrill of seeing something beloved come alive did what only special films can do, transcended annoyance and tapped into wonder. Then there are the Reddit threads that read like oral history. 98% audience score, they quoted, best in the series yet. Comments that say Sonic 3 broke the video game movie curse, that Carrey delivered peak Robotnik, that Reeves' shadow might be one of the best casting decisions in movie history. Another compared the final duel to a live-action Dragon Ball fight, but done right. And someone else, a non-Sonic fan, confessed they went from curious to committed in 2 hours. So let's stitch this together, cast and crowd, like chapters of one great, sprawling folktale. First, the voices, Elba, Schwartz, Reeves, Carrey. They approach their roles with a quiet kind of reverence, not just for legacy, but for life, humor, vulnerability. They knew their characters weren't cart pulled on the screen. They were hearts pushing heavy truths forward. Elba played a softened warrior. Schwartz played a hero discovering his own fragility and force. Reeves played grief-given form, rage that could become grace. Carrey played dual echoes of genius and grief, wrapped in mania and regret. The result of that devotion? A film space full of breathing, flawed souls, CGI and green screen, yes, but with texture. The actors' voices weren't voices on top of animation. They were the soft engine powering each leap, each clash, each tremor. And then the audience arrives, sometimes as a roar, sometimes as a quiet thrill, sometimes as a ripple of laughter or childlike discovery. The movie didn't just meet them, it recognized them. The kid saw a hero. The grown-up saw echoes of narrative redemption. The fans saw their myths honored. The non-fans ended wonderstruck. In every reaction, in every Muller's post, in every theater, the film flexes shared emotional language. Nostalgia, exhilaration, recognition, surprise, and cathartic release. The cast gave themselves the material. The audience took the gift and turned it into the second act of the story. It's a rare, luminous thing when performer and spectator converge, not like mirror and reflection, but like fire and spark. Each fan cheering, each emotional gasp, each whispered yes, becomes part of the movie's living narrative, an echo carried beyond the screen into memory. Cast and crew sifted the myths, fun, and heartbreak into a vessel. Audience pour their own echoes back in. Laughter, tears, fandom, surprise. And there it is, this living exchange. The story retold not just by the script, but by the lives it touched. All right, let's settle in for this final stretch together. The way friends lean back in creaking chairs after a long night of conversation, still smiling, still unwilling to let the fire burn out. We've walked quite a road with this film, haven't we? We began as a small gathering of literature-minded travelers, curious about what this particular story could give us, not just as viewers, but as thinkers, readers of images, hearers of subtext. From the first frame to the last, we've traced the bones beneath the fur and the lightning. We've lingered over characters like old portraits, studying the brushstrokes, letting their flaws and glories stand side by side. We've wandered through scenes like gardens, some manicured and measured, others wild and pulsing, finding the thematic seeds tucked into the soil. We took our time with the plot, letting the moments breathe instead of rushing to the next explosion or punchline. We unpacked the way the story placed heroism and vulnerability on the same plate, daring to let them mingle. We marveled at the strange, true-to-life moments when humor carried sorrow on its back, or when action became a quiet revelation. The film didn't just give us spectacle. It gave us something that could sit with us afterwards, the way a song sometimes stays in your throat even after the last note fades. We peered behind the curtain and saw the living, breathing machine of filmmaking at work, the set laughter, the near disasters averted by clever minds, the actors' choices that weren't scripted but felt inevitable once spoken. We saw how trust and collaboration gave the story its warmth, how even the tiniest production details carried intention. In that space, art wasn't just performance. It was care for the world being built, care for the people who would step into it. We played detective with symbols and shadows, noticing the colors that weren't chosen by accident, the framing that whispered more than it shouted, the small visual callbacks that tied the narrative together like knots in an old fisherman's net. We asked ourselves, what does this mean beyond the moment? And the film, to its credit, seemed happy to answer, not in tidy sentences, but in gestures, echoes, and recurring shapes. We've listened to the voices who gave life to these characters, both literally and in spirit. Idris, Ben, Keanu, Jim, and felt the sincerity in their words. The way they spoke about their characters was not unlike the way authors speak about their most beloved creations. Protective, amused, proud, and a little in awe. We've also let the audience have their say, from the roaring cheers in sold-out theaters to the quiet "that's shadow" whispered in the dark. These reactions became part of the story itself. Proof that a film is a sealed object, but a living exchange between makers and receivers. We've drifted to the landscapes, both real and imagined, that became stages for this tale. We've noticed how light clung to certain angles, how the world was built to not just house the action, but to reflect it. And in every chase, every standoff, every stillness, there was a rhythm, a careful dance between camera, sound, and story that shaped how we felt without us even realizing it. And maybe most importantly, we've honored the film not only for craft, but for its resonance. Because a good story can be clever, beautiful, well-made, but a great story steps beyond itself. It speaks in the quiet spaces between plot points. It says something about being alive, messy, joyful, frightened, stubborn, in love with a strange fact of existence. This one, it managed to find those quiet spaces, even in the middle of speed, sparks, and chaos. Now, as we close this chapter of our conversation, I find myself holding on to something I didn't expect, a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the way this film reminded me that even the most fantastical worlds can carry truths worth holding close. Gratitude for the characters who made me laugh and pause in the same breath. Gratitude for filmmakers who trusted that their audience, whether lifelong fans or first-timers, would feel the difference between a quick thrill and a lasting echo. So, dear friends, fellow readers of light and shadow, of dialogue and silence, thank you for walking through this one with me. If this kind of deep, winding journey through a film is your kind of adventure, I'd love for you to stick around. Like the best conversations, the best stories don't really end. They spill into the next and the next and the next. So go ahead, tap that subscribe button, give this a like, and join me again when we crack open another movie's vault. Because somewhere out there, another film is waiting, one with its own symbols to decode, its own quiet truths to find, its own heartbeat to share. And I'd like nothing better than to discover it with you.